So this is kind of the inaugurational Beer and Business, and what this segment is kind of a new series we're doing here in the Midwest where we are working towards business, looking at different kinds of entrepreneurship, different kinds of occupations, and hopefully this is the first of many. I'm super excited to have Tom Cox here, Kansas Congressman. We're going to not go into issues because that I think is covered in ad nauseum by everybody else. What we're really going to be talking about is the occupation of being a congressperson. And what that's like, and especially in the case of Tom, what it's like doing that early in your career as a young adult versus kind of later after you've typically have already had a career and already gone through kind of that, and later in life you're looking to do civic duty. So we're going to kind of kick it off and start with some basic questions, and then hopefully have an interesting conversation that everybody will want to watch. So. First off, Tom Cox, can you introduce yourself, kind of say who you are?
Yeah, my name is Tom Cox. I'm a state representative in the state of Kansas, House District 17, which is parts of Shawnee, Lenexa, and Lake Quivira. And I'm in my first term.
Tom, I think you and I have known each other for several years.
Yes.
So one of the cool things about that is I kind of have an idea of some of the trials and tribulations that you had to go through to get to here. So yeah. I think one of the first things let's talk about is what it's like being new to this whole being a congressperson, and what is it that drives it, and why did you get involved, and obviously what did you have to give up to do so young in your career?
Yeah, man, the phrase they use in Topeka the most is drinking from the fire hose, which is incredibly accurate. Walking in, especially not having worked in politics. I mean, years ago I used to work on campaigns and things like that, but that was almost a decade ago before I did this, so it's changed so much since then. So it was pretty overwhelming learning the process, building the relationships with people, but it was fantastic at the same time, exciting, fun, rewarding.
Sure. So what is it that, what have you kind of given up? What are some things I think that people don't understand about the position? I think everybody's got this misconception that you're on holiday all the time and you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And, the interns are doing all the work, and so that kind of stuff. So let's go through kind of the life cycle of the career, basically.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is people think we're paid really handsomely, and we're not in the state of Kansas. We're actually, I think, the 48th lowest paid state legislature.
Okay.
So my pay is about $15,000 a year. That's what my W-2 said last year for 4 months full-time work, usually about 12-hour days while we're in session.
Okay.
I usually get in by 8, and I usually get home 8, 9, sometimes 10 o'clock when the day finishes. It is the lowest paying job I will probably ever have, but it is also the most rewarding, so I'll take it.
Right.
The other issue with that is we're in session at least 4 months out of the year, and then you have a lot of work outside of that. So it's effectively, it consumes about 6 months of your year.
Sure.
Devoted to this job for effectively about $15,000 in pay. Now we get some per diem, but I maintain a second residence in Topeka while we're in session, and so that gets eaten away pretty fast.
And I think that's something a lot of people don't think about is Topeka's far enough away from Kansas City, and first you're kind of required to live in district, right?
Yep.
And so you have to have a property, you have to be a homeowner or a resident or something of that district.
Yeah.
I assume you can be a renter or something like that.
Correct. You just have to be a resident of the district.
Right. So you've got that kind of cost and expense, which would be your typical home expense, right? And that's where you really live. But like you're talking about, when you're working those kinds of hours, you can't just keep driving back and forth, so you end up with a residence in Topeka.
Exactly.
Which is now coming out of pocket for those components. I can't even imagine people maybe in the western parts of the states and those kinds of things. Can you talk to maybe a little bit what they're having to do?
Yeah, so it's an hour drive for me, which is manageable. There are days that I have an event coming in the evening back here, or just sometimes you just want to sleep in your own bed. So I can commute if need be. It just takes 2 hours out of the day. But I have colleagues that are 4 or 5, I think the longest is 6 hours from the Capitol. Most of them, they don't go home on the weekends.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. They would get home late Friday night. If not, if we don't get out late enough, they may have to leave Saturday, and they're on the road again by noon Sunday. It just doesn't make sense. So it's an even greater sacrifice for people out there.
You're right. And so obviously you've got all the legislative duties and the committees and all those kinds of things. And then I assume, there's always this in the back of your head, like, okay, I've got to continue to get all these activities and other things outside of even that
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm going to get elected again, so I can continue kind of this great work I'm doing.
Oh yeah.
How much of your time does that eat up? I mean, I'm sure that eats up time outside of the 6 months that you're doing other stuff too.
When we're not in session and not on a campaign, I still spend about 20 hours every week doing my job, whether it's reaching out to constituents, providing constituent services. I'll have people reach out to me saying, hey, you're my representative, I'm trying to get on the Medicaid program, but
Sure.
they rejected me. And then my job is to help facilitate them and walk them through the process, reach out to
Right.
KDHE and say, hey, what's going on? Why is this person stuck in a queue? I've had people reach out to me saying they won't send me my tax return. And so I call and say what happened, like, oh my gosh, that got backlogged, and it gets processed a few days later.
So I don't think they understand the civil servant piece of it, that they think it's some kind
Exactly.
of lofty position where you don't have to deal with anyone.
And we don't get paid for any of that. We only get paid when we're in session. And I do a lot of town halls. I keep up with
Right.
our local chamber of commerce. I go speak to our schools, talking
Sure.
to kids about trying to get involved in what's going on and engaging them. I mean, the list goes on and on, but it's about 20 hours a week of
Right.
work when you're not in session.
So I mean, so how do you address people like, yeah, maybe he's only getting paid X on paper, but I'm sure he's got this massive whatever firm and lobby and da-da-da-da-da. And,
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that is just, they don't understand that that's not real.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just media driven.
It's really not. People always think what the U.S. Congress makes and think,
Yeah.
oh, they make $170,000, they're doing great, all this stuff.
Right.
And we're like, no, we make $15,000. We're horribly paid, which is fine. I mean, you do it for a love. And,
Right.
but you're right. It's hard to maintain a full-time job. For my example, I was vice president of a company, and I worked the first year. I couldn't keep up with it,
Yeah.
and so I decided to leave the company. I gave up a six-figure job to do this.
Yeah.
Now, I was fortunate at the fact that I had a side business that derived enough income
Yeah.
that between the two, I can continue to subsist. But we lose a lot of great legislators that are younger
Yeah.
because they're forced choosing between a public service or a career.
Right.
And especially so early in the career, that can be, it's like investing.
Yeah.
You know, if you hurt it in the beginning, that usually hurts you the longest.
Right. Yeah, because your career trajectory is a compounding interest, just like
Like a 401k.
401k or whatever,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So if you don't do that early on, then it does drastically reduce your total earning potential down the road, right? So it's very
Absolutely.
calculated that you would do this so early. I mean, that's one of the reasons I thought it was very interesting to have an interview with you.
Yeah.
Is, obviously you have a love of the civic duty component, right?
Yes.
So I think it also says to why you're not seeing more good people come into the company, because they would have to be able to live based on a lesser component of income
Exactly.
in order to even participate in the civic duty component, which speaks to there's something broken there, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, here are your kind of options. You either have to be independently wealthy, have a spouse that makes enough money that you can do this,
Right.
have a job that will let you effectively take off 6 months out of the year, which used to be a little more common. Companies used to be really supportive of, like, yeah, we'd love for you to be a civil servant. That's
Right.
awesome. It complements the mission. And now companies are like, nah, we can hire a lobbyist if we have an issue. We don't. It's a lot harder to get companies to agree to that.
Right.
And again, you stall your career track. Because even if they let you do it, they're not going to move you up. They're not going to give you important tasks. You're going to get
Right.
into something that's a little more comfortable and stable.
Which I think is why you see the vast majority of those being people that are kind of done with their career. You know,
Absolutely.
they've finished, they've sold a business, they've
Yep.
done X.
The average age is, I think, 61 in the House right now, and it's older in the Senate, I believe.
Okay.
In the Kansas Senate and the Kansas House.
Now, does the Senate versus the House have a difference in time that they have to spend there? I mean, is there
No,
workload
it's the
difference?
same. Now, if you ask a Senate or House member, they will give you different answers. As a House member, I would say there is a different workload. The House does all the work, and the Senate messes up what we do.
Right.
The Senate will tell you the opposite, probably.
Right.
So,
Right.
but we typically work more bills in the House and then send them to the Senate, and the Senate sends us less bills. But they have they're a 40-member body, and we're a 125-member. So we have more resources to spread around to work on things. So that is a reason why that typically happens.
So what's that like? I mean, trying to get stuff passed and organized. I mean, 120 people getting to agree on anything. I mean,
Yeah.
without getting into policy, right? And,
Yeah.
and the fact that there's Democrats and Republicans, and I saw a populist and some other kind
Yep.
of weird stuff, right? What's the process look like, and how does anything get done?
Yeah.
I mean, how does that sausage get made in a way that
Yeah.
works?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, obviously, some stuff gets done. and obviously it was designed to a certain extent, if anybody understands the history of the whole system, to be somewhat slow.
Yeah.
So that we didn't have changes that destroyed things.
Well, you're exactly right. When things are really easy to pass, mistakes are made. And you go,
Yeah.
oh, well, that was a cool idea we had, but we didn't think of the 10 unintended consequences that are terrible. So, for example, I'll use a controversial topic, but they passed a bill that said that you have to allow people to conceal and carry in state institutions.
Okay.
Well, what they didn't think about was that we have 2 state mental health facilities.
Okay.
So under how the law was drafted, if you admitted someone in there, let's say for schizophrenia or something like that, bipolar,
Right.
anything where they needed help and treatment,
Right.
but they had a gun that they legally owned on them, you couldn't remove it from them.
Oh my gosh.
Because of the state law was worded in a way that there was
Right.
no caveat for that. So we had to fix that law because
Right.
we're going, oh no, that's a big
terrible.
issue. Yeah.
Right.
Like it applied the same to KU Hospital,
Right.
which is one of the only state hospitals, is that if you had someone in there that was coming in for surgery but he had a gun on them, if you took that gun away from them, you could suffer prison time.
Right.
Because you have now broken the law by removing the gun from this person who may be getting drugs put into morphine,
Right.
has maybe a bullet wound or something
Right,
that's
right.
aggravated, being on drugs. So you have to be really careful in the process. You want it to be slow,
Right.
deliberate.
Right.
How the process typically works
I
is
think that works for any right? I mean,
Absolutely,
There's
yeah.
these rules you got to place around it, or
Yeah.
it creates issues. But at the same time, you got to try to preserve the right. And
there's a reason changing the Constitution is incredibly difficult. It's because they want it only be changed when you have that much broad support for it.
Right.
The basic process is you work on a bill, you draft it. We have professional legal staff that helps us do that in the Capitol. They're all attorneys, and they're completely nonpartisan. Actually, Kansas pioneered that system years ago, creating
cool.
nonpartisan staff. And then you introduce it to a committee. The committee will give it a hearing. Then the committee works it. If it passes out of the committee, and works it means they make amendments, they debate it within the committee. There's no people outside the committee that can
Right.
contribute to it.
So the smaller group probably makes it a little bit more efficient.
Exactly. Then if you pass out of the committee, it runs on the House floor. Again, debate happens. If the House floor passes it, it moves over to the Senate, starts the whole process again.
Okay.
Now that's the basic process. And then once it goes through both, it goes to the governor if it's the same bill. If there's changes, we form a conference committee with members from the House and Senate, and they negotiate the differences in the bill and come to a compromise.
Okay.
Now the political part of that is how you get a bill heard, how you get it worked, how you get it to move through that steps. Because just introducing a bill doesn't guarantee a hearing.
Right.
So you want to build support. So you try to build a coalition of people by, when I worked on a bill, I'll use my own example. It's a bill to form a dyslexia task force.
Yeah.
Kansas doesn't address dyslexia in any way in the education system.
Right.
We're one of 8 states starting this session that did not do that. And so I've been working with dyslexia advocates on what should we do. So I drafted a bill. But before I submitted it, I spoke to the chairman of the education committee, which it would be seen in. I spoke to members of the committee. I spoke to the Kansas Association of School Boards, the teachers union, the different various people that had stake in it. Shawnee Mission School District, which I
Right.
represent, their head of special education, said, I want your feedback. And we started working out and talking about the differences. We introduced it to committee. It was given a hearing because I worked with people to build support for it.
Right.
There were issues, sat down with all the people, we negotiated the changes out, changed the bill, and the committee passed it unanimously. The House passed it unanimously. And then it moves over to the Senate side. So then I immediately went and met with
they
the
messed it all
Senate
up.
chair. yeah. They did make changes, but it's okay. Theirs weren't too bad. But their changes weren't as bad as they could be because I sat down with the
Right.
Senate chair. I sat down with
Right.
senators on the education committee and worked with them and said, hey, let's collaborate on this. I agree we could change this. Please don't change this portion.
Right.
I sat down with conservatives, with moderates, with liberals, and we came together and said, where can we all agree? Where are we divisive on this? And it has actually passed through the House, passed through the Senate committee, and the Senate is hopefully hearing it this week.
Interesting. Very cool.
So, and that's really how it worked through, but that took a lot of effort and time.
Yeah, I can
and
imagine
energy.
that takes time and effort.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, you have to like people in order for that to work. And
Yes, yes. Being an extrovert is very key to success in this job at times. Not that introverts don't do a great job as well too, because a lot of the time you have an introvert representative, but they're the one that comes up and says, "Hey, did you notice this weird line in this bill?" Like,
Yeah.
no, you're like, yeah, think about that line and what that means. You're like, oh crap, yeah, I completely didn't catch that, because they tend to often dig a little more deeper in there.
Right.
So there's a place for everyone up there, which is the fun part of it.
Right. So, obviously, getting back to kind of the original premise, which is kind of this, the effect in essence of being so young and in there. How does that interplay with some of the people you're interacting with? I mean, obviously you've got kind of this age dynamic going on.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of old people, a lot of younger people. So how does that play out on the day?
Yeah, so when I came in, I was 31. I'm 32 now in my first term. I was 30 years below the average age. And I'm the third youngest in the legislature. Between House and Senate, I'm number 3. 2 people are younger than me. They're actually in their 20s.
Oh, wow.
I got up there ready to, expect that people weren't going to treat me equally, that I was going to have to work harder to prove that I deserved to be at the table. And what I surprisingly found is I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Is that the vast majority of people up there have the mentality of you worked and got elected by your district the same as any other person here. Sometimes you worked harder than other people, and they respect that. Say you deserve this seat at the table as much as anyone.
Right.
So that was actually really refreshing and exciting. I do have to be a little more cautious because a lot of my peers are 10, 20, 30 years older than me. So at first it's kind of interesting dynamics of the social situations, and we'll have jokes. Like we were out at a dinner the other night where I was 15 years younger than anyone else there.
Right.
And people were talking about, oh yeah, you remember this movie? Oh, I loved that show, blah, 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 blah. And they were talking about it. Like, oh yeah, 1980 was great. And I just turned and I go, that was 5 years before I was born. And everyone just kind of stopped and looked down and they're like, oh my God. Yeah. Thanks for making us feel old, Tom. I was like, just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, exactly.
So everyone takes it
Right.
with a lot of
And I think
brevity.
in my experience in business community and other things, it's a similar issue. It's like, it really is, so few people get involved civically, right? Everybody has an opinion, but not
Yeah.
everybody gets involved civically. And so once you're actually involved and you're in those groups, they're so happy to have help. Because most people I know that are in civic responsibility would just be happy if more people were involved.
Yeah.
Right? Because they feel like it would be a better quality product at the end of the day. So.
And we need people that are younger. That's one of the things that people have come to me and said, hey, Tom, we want to talk broadband.
Right.
Because you've worked for tech companies, but you're younger. Your generation is the one that wants everything streaming. We're the ones starting the cutting cable movement. I've never had cable personally in my
Right.
life, but I've always had internet, and I have Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. And so a lot of times people will come and say, we need your perspective because not only do we not necessarily understand this technology, we don't use it.
Right.
And so you need an age group up there. At the same time, you want people in your 60s and 70s. You want people that are retired, that are dealing with Social Security or dealing with pensions
Right.
or 401ks. Because I haven't had to deal with that yet. I mean, probably won't have Social Security to deal with, but at this rate. But
Now we're staying out of issues.
yeah, right. Good point. And so you want this perspective up there, and it actually really helps. And I think people find that beneficial a lot of the times.
Yeah, and I think a wider array of representation would obviously be a good thing. So, so we've kind of covered the fact that you got to kind of property in both places, and you've got to kind of do all these things, which would typically be something that would be easier for someone, third, fourth career. I think
Yeah.
if you had to list the one thing that's the hardest, is it the money? Is it what is it that is the hardest being kind of new to the position and being so early in your just professional career?
The money is definitely difficult. I've been very, very blessed and fortunate that I was able to start a consulting business on the side, and that my previous company supported that, and that I built it up to generate enough revenue that combined I can do this.
Right.
But it was a hard pay cut, leaving my corporate job and having to go from plenty of money, putting things in savings, to all of a sudden, massively cutting out my expenses, my costs on a monthly basis.
Sure.
But I would actually say the hardest part is the criticism. People tend to dehumanize politicians. And it's kind of like a cyberbullying thing, that all of a sudden someone will disagree with a vote of mine and they will think it's okay to get on social media, to call me, to email me, and tell me what a god-awful person I did, that I hope that, if I voted a certain way on a gun bill, that someone says, I hope that your children get shot. And I don't have children, but we've seen that. Actually,
Right.
someone said that to one of my colleagues because how they voted on gun bills. I hope your children get shot so you will know what a horrible decision you made. And it just is mind-blowing that
Right.
people are willing to do this. In the campaign process, you kind of get used to it. All these groups attack you and slander your name and try to make you sound like this horrible villain.
Right.
But you really have to adjust to that. And I've talked to a lot of people that got into it. They did it one term and they said, I can't do this. I
don't
don't
skin
want to
for
do
it.
this. Yeah, they're like, this is horrible. This makes me feel miserable. Luckily, I have a pretty tough skin. I know that as long as I keep listening to my district and doing what I think is right, that I can take that criticism and move on. But there are days you get on there and you're just getting beaten up left and right. Like people that you know.
Yeah.
People that know you all of a sudden think it's okay to just start insulting you in a way that if they did to any other person, people would be horrified.
Right.
I actually think that's the most difficult thing that people really don't think about.
Yeah, and I think that's, fortunately, I think, I'm old enough, I'm in my 40s, and so I've kind of bridged the divide. And owning a technology company, I kind of see a lot of these things. And so I think I was probably the last generation that was going to grow up being able to be forgotten in the sense that my youth and the things I did in my youth and all those kinds of things weren't intimately documented, permanently on the internet. And so I could do a mistake or two and be okay. I think now that is unfortunately irrevocably gone, and this one of these great American values, which is everybody deserves a second chance, is being eroded by things like social media and those kinds of things, because it's being permanently documented and it's easy to bring back up and it can't be forgotten. And so I think that there's going to be an interesting time, both civically, from a government perspective, on what that means.